Jaylen Waddle has joined the collection of wide receivers cashing in big time this offseason. How does that set the stage for Ja'Marr Chase, and what does it say about Tee Higgins? Let's dive in.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Appreciate all of you out there making us part of your everyday routine, making us your first listen, checking us out in the car ride to work or on the way home. Wherever you're listening to Locked On Bengals, we appreciate it. And if you're new to the show, you can always subscribe to make it easier to find our content when we get your latest updates on all things Bengals. And those updates today will focus on wide receiver money, taking a look at some recent wide receiver extensions highlighted by Jaylen Waddle's deal announced on Thursday or reported on Thursday. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time, where you can get $20 off your first purchase of tickets on the Game Time app with promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Some terms do apply, but James, like terms apply for your ticket purchases with Game Time, terms apply for many new wide receiver contracts that have been inked and will apply in the future for Ja'Marr Chase and somewhere for Tee Higgins. But if you were still holding out hope for a Tee Higgins deal to get done in Cincinnati, I think that path has narrowed beyond the needle hole that you were trying to thread before this deal was announced.
Yeah, I think it was already over. Just full disclosure, I don't think there was a chance in hell that they were getting a deal done. And for a bunch of reasons, but it's pretty simple. You look at Jaylen Waddle's guaranteed money. And what did you say? That started with a 7? And we're not talking $70? Okay, we're talking 70 plus million. Well, Tee Higgins isn't getting that in Cincinnati. It's just, it's not happening. And their philosophy is pretty simple. I think there's going to be very few guys that they give that type of guaranteed money to. And so I thought that the deal or the chances of a deal were kind of buried when Calvin Ridley, a David Mulligetta client, got 50 plus, I think it was million guaranteed. It was something like that. 3 years, 50 plus million guaranteed from the Titans. I was like, okay, well, that's that. But if that isn't that, this is certainly that. And the Bengals just don't have, I don't think they have the motivation to give T that type of guaranteed money, because let's just say it's the same Waddle deal. Right now they have T on a $21 million franchise tag. They could tag him again next year for $26 million, roughly. And it's more than that, but it's roughly $47 million over 2 years. Jaylen Waddle is going to get, it's a 3-year, $70 plus million just guaranteed money extension. You mentioned $85 million overall. The Bengals have no motivation to do that. And T wants it, of course. T wants to stay in Cincinnati and be in Cincinnati. But I think a deal is done in a sense that there is no deal and it's not going to get done. I'm not even sure there's going to be talks between now and that July 15th deadline, just because I think both sides have planted their flag. They know where they lie or where their logic is and their mindset is. And so Tee Higgins is going to make $20 plus million this year and then be scheduled to hit free agency next year. And then there's a chance, if he plays well, that the Bengals may tag him again, which stinks for T. I'm sure he doesn't like it, but I think it is in play given the wide receiver market and what's happened. But he's got to play well for that to happen.
Yeah, there are differences, of course, between Tee Higgins' situation and Jaylen Waddle's situation at this point. Jaylen Waddle was in the Ja'Marr Chase draft class and had a 5th-year option. And the 5th-year option for Jaylen Waddle was relatively cheap, especially when you compare it to the maximum 5th-year option price for Ja'Marr Chase being a 2-time Pro Bowler versus the Jaylen Waddle no-time Pro Bowler 5th-year option. It's much cheaper. It's $5 million or $6 million cheaper for that 5th-year option for Jaylen Waddle. The 3 years that Miami added are after that 5th-year option, and so they take some of that signing bonus and they lump it into the last year of the rookie deal. They put it in that 5th-year option year as well to defray some of the costs. The cap hit for Jaylen Waddle isn't huge until 2027, at which point I don't think anyone expects Tyreek Hill to be part of the Miami Dolphins. And so while they are going to be paying 2 wide receivers for a couple of years here, there's only 1 year where there's any overlap of any significant cap hit. And really at that point, it's still a manageable cap hit for Jaylen Waddle. And that's in 2025, assuming that Tyreek Hill is still on the Dolphins in 2025, which I think is a question that the Dolphins will have to answer next year. So the common theme when you look at Jaylen Waddle, when you look at Devontae Smith, is that these are Ja'Marr Chase year players getting paid. And even Amon-Ra St. Brown, who got the biggest deal out of any of these guys, these are 2021 year wide receivers getting paid. And for 2 of them, you're including 5th-year option in these extensions. And for Amon-Ra St. Brown, even, they're getting to use the last year of that rookie deal for part of that extension. The Bengals didn't get it done last year with T, and so at this point, any extension they would offer him would be all new money. The cap hit implications would be much different, and they also don't do business the way the Eagles do business, doing option years that are pushing all of Devontae Smith's money into void years in the future. The cap hit, the biggest cap hit on Devontae Smith's deal is when he's no longer playing for the Eagles. The way the Eagles did that deal, $35.7 million in accelerated void cap hits in 2029, the year after that deal ends. So these are not deals that the Bengals would do the way they do business, but the big lesson here is that you need to pay guaranteed money to guys to keep them on your team. Essentially, all of this contract, even though it's only a fully guaranteed $36 million, most of the money on this contract for Jaylen Waddle is guaranteed because it all guarantees the year before. The salaries all guarantee the year before. So his 2028 salary guarantees the 3rd day of the league year of 2027. So he's very likely to see all of this money, all of this salary, all of this stuff. And the Bengals need to do this, obviously, for Ja'Marr Chase, which is where this conversation leads to the player that we think they would actually do this sort of thing for. But also, this is a continuing trend for secondary weapons in offenses with Devontae Smith and Jaylen Waddle being the 2 most recent examples. You could even go further and talk about Calvin Ridley the same way for many teams. The Bengals will have to figure out how to pay guaranteed money at some point to players who are not the very top of their position, or they are really going to be struggling to keep their own players, as we've seen them have issues with in recent years.
Sure. And that's the philosophical approach has to change. We've seen them change different things that they've done over the past few years and really half decade now. And that makes sense. And they're going to have to continue to evolve. And it does bring the conversation to Ja'Marr Chase, because when Jaylen Waddle, when that deal got done, I didn't even think about Tee Higgins. And I saw the reaction with the fan base. And I think they're in just completely different categories because of the draft class, because one's a 1st-round pick, all of those things. But what it does do is it gives the Bengals at least an idea of what a 3-year deal could look like for Ja'Marr, who's obviously going to have the 5th-year option as well. You have the precedent of not paying Ja'Marr after 3 years. CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson last year, they're still waiting on their contract extension. So that could happen. Or you could go this route where you go shorter term, 3-year extension with a ton of money guaranteed. And so what does that look like? Would Ja'Marr take 3 years, $100 million with 90 guaranteed? Would the Bengals be willing to do that? Do they wait another year in hopes of extending him for 4 years and not just 3? I think that is interesting. If I'm the Bengals, I would want to get it done this offseason if I can. And if I'm Ja'Marr, the only way I would do it this offseason would be if it is shorter and with a ton of guaranteed money and clearly more money than Waddle. So Waddle's at roughly 85 million. I'm rounding up a little. Would 100 get it done? Would it be 110 over 3? I'm not sure, but I think that's the waters the Bengals are starting to swim in, or should start swimming in, if they want to get a deal done with Ja'Marr this offseason.
Yeah, they probably need to look at, well, not probably, they need to look at topping the Amon-Ra St. Brown deal. And the difference with Ja'Marr is that they do have the 5th-year option to play with to defray some of the costs in terms of salary cap hits, since we don't think they're going to do option years and void years the way the Lions did with Amon-Ra St. Brown to push money into the future. But Ja'Marr Chase now has an increasingly rising floor, which is probably part of why he's waiting. I agree, though, James. If I'm the Bengals, I am prioritizing getting that done early because a common theme is that all these 21 receivers are getting their deals done early. And the sooner you act, the better for the team. And it can still be
It'll feel
really
like a
good.
bargain in a few years. It really might.
A lot of these deals, assuming the players continue on their current trajectories, will look good in retrospect, I think, even though they right now feel like an exploding market. Coming up next, let's talk about the kickoff return, James. A play that will have more importance than it has had since we've been podcasting together in 2024. Coming up next.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. I've used them for something as simple as spark plugs, engine air filters. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. That's right, guaranteed money, baby, from eBay. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers.
Darren Simmons talked with Dan Horde about the kickoff return before the draft, and I think Dan Horde revisited that topic this week. Perhaps this is why this is on the mind of some folks. And Zach Kirshner sent in a question in our mailbag this week, James, talking about the kickoff return. And I realized we haven't really talked about this in a great deal of depth, but Zach is asking, how do you think the new kickoff will play off with the final roster and the Bengals playmakers, especially with rumors of teams who want to use players who can throw the ball to keep coverages honest with lateral passes, which is a common feature in this kickoff return if you've watched it when it was used previously in other leagues. Who's our sneaky best combo of speed and throwing? Can Chase Brown sling it?
Can Chase Brown sling it? Man, I think you'll see Travion Williams, Chris Evans, and that's a battle right there for that to show that. And so those two guys will be in the mix. I think Charlie Jones certainly in the mix. And it does get interesting. You see some of these signings over the past few months. Cordero Patterson to Pittsburgh. Tariq Cohen just signed with the Jets, and he's been injury riddled. But the reason the Jets were interested, I think, in a guy like Cohen is, can he give us a little juice on kickoffs? So finding the right guys for this, it's a really good path if you're one of these undrafted guys or someone that is on the outside looking in of the 53-man roster. Like Chris Evans could be really darn valuable if he shows he can be a high-end kickoff returner this year. I get it. It's like, oh, really, Chris Evans? Are we doing this again? But this kind of changes things a bit. And so whoever can be explosive and make an impact from a kickoff standpoint has a real chance to make the roster, and that opens the door up some. Do the Bengals get super creative? I don't know. I do wonder, what would you want to use? I don't know. Would you try Andre Yosevach? Elite athlete. Would you try him? I don't know. Jermaine Burton. I wonder about that. I haven't noticed it, but if I'm the Bengals, I would probably at least tinker a little bit to try to find the right combo.
Yeah, those guys have not been, as far as I know, working on kickoff returns yet. In its early days, we'll see if we get additional guys in the mix in training camp. It's only been a couple of open OTA practices, and I think you've only seen them work kickoffs once, right? That was this week in OTA. Now that they've gotten to a more involved phase of the offseason program. So it's not like we've seen a whole lot of this yet. There could be guys that continue to work in, but the big addition to the kickoff return unit is Charlie Jones working with those guys. And you go back and you listen to the way that Darren Simmons has talked about this play, and he sees it more like a punt return than an old school kickoff return now, where that's why Charlie Jones is involved. He has talked up Charlie Jones' shiftiness, and obviously we know that Jones has long speed if he can hit the seam. We saw his most successful punt returns come when he just got downhill and found the right lane to pick. and then he could just outrun everybody. But the combination that you're looking for in returners is the ability to make guys miss in short areas, which is why I think Travion Williams and Chris Evans have legitimate chances to show that they belong on the roster and even the game day active list with their ability to operate like running backs, and Chris Evans in particular with the high-end athletic tools that he's never really been able to put together for productive football purposes over the course of a season or over any consistent period of time, could show up and show out on kickoff returns. And another big difference is, and this is a Darren Simmons point again, you need two guys back there. Because of the way the kickoff rules work, I believe they'll have to have two guys back for kickoff returns, which nobody's done that since the last time I played Madden, which was a long time ago. Like you had the two kickoff returners back there still in Madden, as I recall it, like maybe in 2005 or something. But maybe since then people have done it to some degree. But like Zach pointed out in the question, this opens the door for throwback kickoff returns and different kinds of plays and approaches to kickoff returns. Darren Simmons told Dan Horde that, and this is a couple of months ago now, but he was obviously involved in the rule proposal change. This is the most he's had to overhaul the special teams playbook as a special teams coordinator since they got started. And he said there have been changes that he's felt like were huge changes before, like the elimination of wedge blocking and some of those rule changes on kickoff returns to try to make the game safer, but nothing like this. This is an extremely radical rule change for the NFL that will require different personnel for both blocking. The two returner element, I think, is massive in terms of the way you put your roster together, the way that game day active list is put together, because you need two guys back there that you trust and who can work together, especially for some of these trick plays you might see on kickoffs now. And the whole emphasis here is to make the play more exciting, to put offenses in more advantageous field position to start. This is part of the goal of the rule changes, to push drive start position further beyond the 25-yard line as part of a response to scoring being down in the NFL. And so I think the teams that have made moves to try to find some explosive returners are probably, possibly getting ahead of the curve here. And hopefully the Bengals have the guys that can make that work. Like maybe it is a Charlie Jones, Chris Evans tandem in the end. Apparently, a funny text exchange. Charlie Jones immediately texted Darren Simmons about the rule change after it occurred. And Darren told Charlie, you better put on some weight. You're going to take some hits. So, if Charlie Jones does win that job, that could be an interesting tandem back there.
For sure. I was thinking about it. You mentioned Chase Brown. Obviously, I don't think you want him back there all the time, but maybe sometimes.
Yeah.
And Jamar Chase is the most dynamic player on the team. Let's say you're down 4 in Kansas City week 2, 3 minutes left. You say no?
I don't think it's happening.
I'm not saying it should, though, is what I'm saying. Okay. Because these are Randy Moss once upon a time was a punt returner. Like when he was Randy, like you should be willing to do it when there's an actual chance for this guy to make a play. That's all. Playoff game, then fine. Like I would just have it in your holster. Number 1 seed on the line against Pittsburgh in week 8, whatever the case is, have it there because he could be dynamic. That's why I would try Andre. That's why I would try these guys. Into it when we're not there. So I'm not speculating about who's doing what, But well, I would try it.
They don't have like the Pac-Man punt returner that they used to have, right? Where they could run Pac-Man Jones out there when they were like, oh, we're not taking a fair catch here. Because Pac-Man would never, he had like 1 career fair catch or something like that.
That's just Charlie Jones. That's all. He's their Pac-Man.
You hope. I mean, they haven't had a returner like Pac-Man since Pac-Man. They've had some good kickoff returners. And Darren Simmons talked about why Brandon Wilson worked, a college running back who is big and fast. And that's what they've been looking for in kickoff returners for a long time. But this added element of being able to make guys miss in small areas and the increased resemblance to certain running plays that this might look like now with less space for the blockers and the pursuit players to operate will change the kickoff return in big ways. And it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out and how they change their roster construction. I think that it will change the way they make their roster, because you need to have 2 guys you trust to be kickoff returners. And then those guys need to have other roles on game day. So you better be a good gunner too, or have some role in the punt team as well if you're going to be a kickoff returner.
Dax Hill. They're trying him everywhere.
There you go.
Oh my God. Anyways, sorry, Dex.
Coming up next, let's shift off of the kickoff return and discuss where expectations should be for this defensive line that has some young players who are looking to break out and a major overhaul on the interior defensive line to finish up the show.
During the break, Jake, I looked just to see. I was like, oh, well, maybe Josh Newton. I don't think he has any special teams experience. I was trying to find the Pac-Man. He's certainly got the mentality. I'm just not sure that they would try him out there. But let's switch gears and discuss the defensive line.
Well, I was going to say, with Chad Ochocinco making his appearance at Bengals practice on Thursday, why not just bring Pac-Man back? They're bringing Chad back. How different could it be?
Who do you think would win one-on-one right now, Chad or Pac? Pac was guarding Chad.
I think Chad's probably a little bit more active. Not to say that Pac-Man isn't, but I think that like Chad is still actively playing sports with the soccer leagues and stuff. I think that he's probably in a little bit better shape. I think I would give the edge to Chad.
No doubt. I was just making sure. Anyway,
I mean,
go ahead.
Pac is hitting those shots on the Pat McAfee show, though. They're giving away money. I'm not saying that Pac isn't active, to be clear. I think it would be fun. Yeah, the questions about the defensive line here. We got 3 of them. A lot of people are interested in this new look Bengals defensive line. AC Wheels 10 on Twitter, Wes Harrison on Twitter, and Huday 55, Rudy Fryer 55 on Twitter, all asking questions about the defensive line. Adam asking, what can we expect from this defensive line? Marion Hobby and Lou with all the changes there. Wes Harrison's been hearing a lot about potential breakouts of Joseph Ossai and Myles Murphy. Wants to know how they're looking so far early in the offseason program here. And Huday 55 similarly asking about Myles Murphy. If Murphy is effective early on, how much should that cut into Sam Hubbard's snaps? So a lot of questions here about the young edge players and the future for this Bengals defensive line.
I hope Myles Murphy is successful early on and gives the Bengals this embarrassment of riches where they're like, okay, Sam, we're going to play inside some. And I do think, I wonder how willing they are, how open they are to that going into this year. I think Hubbard has the size to do it at times. And if you want to get your best defensive front out there and Murphy emerges, that might be the case. Certainly. So we'll see. He has a long way to go. Has to earn, not only as a pass rusher, has to earn the trust, has to earn the trust in the run game and showing that he can set the edge like Sam. I think that's a big thing the Bengals trust Sam to do. And so we'll see. But I expect Murphy to make a big jump and be a big factor this year. And there's really no reason why he shouldn't take a big step forward. He's young, athletic. He's working really, really hard, has a good attitude, good mindset. Like, you're not hearing anything bad about him, not just in interviews, but I mean off the record, behind the scenes. And so when you have all of the tools, you have the right attitude, you're working hard, you should take a step forward. And I expect him to in a big way and make an impact this year. Joseph Ossai is interesting. And anytime he gets brought up, I think, Jake, both you and I think of Lou Anarumo kind of going out of his way at the combine to mention Joseph Ossai. And last year at this time, we as a collective were like, oh, Ossai, he was coming on late. He's going to be in for a big year. And then you have Murphy behind him. And now he's kind of looked at as the forgotten man. What I will say is if you're Joseph Ossai, this is the year where you have to show it. It's a contract year. Show the league that you can be a disruptor. Show the league that you can, and show Lou Anarumo and Marion Hobby that you deserve to be in there on passing downs, certainly. And could that happen? I think it could. I think he has to earn it. I think Murphy's sort of past him, is the favorite at least. Maybe not past him because we don't have a depth chart, so no reason to really go that route with the description. But do I think that the Bengals are optimistic that Murphy's going to take a step forward? Yes. Does Joseph Ossai have every reason to be motivated to go out there and put his best foot forward? Also, yes. So hopefully both of those guys are a big factor this year.
We were questioning why Joseph Ossai was playing so much in the preseason last year.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be questioning it this year. We get it now. We understand what's happened in terms of Ossai's profile in the eyes of coaches. He is behind. I think you said you kind of walked it back. He is, I think, behind and has been passed up by Myles Murphy on the depth chart that doesn't really exist yet. I think he's also behind Cam Sample right now. I think that the second unit for the Bengals at the edge right now is probably Sample and Murphy. And so I think that Ossai does probably have some work to do. But this is too early days to really say how either of these guys is going to play this year. I think you'll get a feel for it a little bit in camp with better tackles for the Bengals than they've had in camp in pass protection in recent years. How they perform against Trent Brown and Orlando Brown, assuming they get some run against them when the pads get on in camp, will be instructive. If they have any joint practices this year? They haven't announced any yet, I guess. We don't know. But those joint practices would be interesting. Preseason games for these guys will be, I think, important to see how their technique has evolved, even if they're not going against starters necessarily in those games. And so
a Bengals versus Legends game where Chad, Pac-Man, Whitworth, they all come back.
Andrew Whitworth weighing a
joint
svelte,
practice,
weighing a svelte like 220 or something, 250.
How embarrassing would it be? It's like, yeah, Ossai's been locked up all day. Ossai just can't get by him. Whitworth with his big wit, little mic. He's got the mic as he's blocking.
Just got to go sign wit is what the takeaway is there.
Don't do it.
The point is, Joseph Ossai, I think, has work to do to work his way back into the rotation in a significant way, but he does have a chance to do it. I'm not ruling that out. He certainly has the tools and the athleticism and the pass rush profile that should get him into a bigger rotational role for the Bengals. Now, we kind of went away from Murphy there because you finished on Ossai, and so I wanted to build on that thought. But what you started with Myles Murphy is the trajectory for him. We're still hoping for the Rashawn Gary path here, right? And if there's a potential biggest sleeper on this Bengals roster right now, it might be Myles Murphy. And I'm saying a potential sleeper because I don't really know yet. We'll see how the later offseason program goes for him. I'm talking training camp. I'm talking preseason. I guess the preseason, not the offseason program goes for him. But this is a first-round pick you're talking about with a ton of athletic tools, and you're talking about the year 1 to year 2 jump that we always talk about as this should be the biggest jump for players in their professional careers. You should see that step up from Myles Murphy this year. You should see him able to play as a complete defense, and I know he's still young, as a complete defensive end in this defense to a greater degree than last year. And if he's going to go on that Rashawn Gary trajectory that we talked about for him, and I don't remember when it was sometime in the last few weeks, we compared the stats between Rashawn Gary and Myles Murphy. And that's always been like the ideal trajectory for Myles Murphy. Maybe there's a different player who is a little bit raw and toolsy coming out that you prefer as a comparison, but the general trajectory of those two players where they have all these athletic tools and need to put it together a little bit in the NFL, that would need to start continue this year with a breakout kind of year for Myles Murphy. And first round defensive ends, first round edge players should be playing a lot in their second year.
Yep.
He should effectively be a starter, except they have Sam Hubbard on the team. And so, yes, that should cut into Sam Hubbard snaps because you should expect that Myles Murphy, a first round player with all those athletic tools, is good enough to do that. And they'll have to find ways to keep those guys on the field like you talked about, whether that's Sam Hubbard or whether that's Myles Murphy playing inside a little bit on some certain downs or whatever, or finding the roles for those guys, because all these questions, we're focusing on the edge here because that's where some of the specific questions yet. But AC Wheel's question about the new defensive line we haven't even talked about the interior yet, which is where the biggest changes are in replacing DJ Reader somehow with this combination of Sheldon Rankins, Chris Jenkins, and McKinley Jackson. And that is a bigger conversation. We're going to have to see how that evolves and how they change the way they're using their interior defensive line. And part of that, I think, could include some of these edge guys, Myles Murphy and Sam Hubbard in particular, finally for Sam Hubbard, getting some opportunities to play inside a little bit as well.
And I think just looking at Sam, I think he can do it like regularly. Like I do. Like I think he's got the size and all of that. And so could that take some pressure off of these young guys and find a spot for Myles Murphy where you do have a first rounder? That doesn't mean Chris Jenkins won't get a ton of snaps or Sheldon Rankins or BJ Hill, obviously, but you need the bodies. And so that rotation is really interesting to me. Does McKinley Jackson work his way in there? not just on goal line packages and things like that, but more often. I wonder. I don't know. I think it will take some time, but we'll see. Maybe he exceeds my expectations and can get out there. I think Chris Jenkins is ready to go and is going to make an impact right away. I just do. He might make the biggest impact, and we can do a show biggest impact maybe of any of the rookies early on. I just think he's ready to go, and there's going to be obvious snaps for him. So we'll see. But that's a big question going into camp. And in the start of the regular season, even, is how these interior alignment, how it shakes out. Does Hubbard get in the mix? Does Cam Sample get in the mix? I wonder. I think Hubbard should be there more than Cam, but we'll see if they're willing to do that with Hubbard.
Yeah, we might get a look at where these guys align in the preseason and in practices a little bit, because I don't think we're going to see them necessarily a ton in games. I don't think they would necessarily show that in games, but we should see it in practices from time to time. So that is something that we'll be watching for in some of these training camp practices when we're standing out there sweating in the sun with the fans and the Bengals in late July, early August, whenever training camp rolls around. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. The Bengals have a couple more OTA practices that we will continue to cover. And if you need more coverage, if you need more sports talk, Locked On has a first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's on YouTube. It's on Amazon Fire TV. You can check that out on the free TV Fire TV channels app. Until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.